So today we're going to talk about what might just be the most underrated part of the entire U.S. Constitution. Article V. Yeah, I know, it's short, it's kind of dense, but it is the absolute linchpin. It's the glue, the special sauce that took this loose collection of states and actually forged them into one single powerful nation.
I want you to put yourself in the shoes of the framers for a second. Back in 1787, you've just won a revolution. Amazing, right? But your new country is teetering on the edge of complete collapse. You've got 13 powerful, often pretty selfish states, and each one is acting like its own little kingdom. So the big question is, how in the world do you get them to act as one?
Well, the answer they came up with was, frankly, a stroke of genius, and it was hidden away in one of the shortest articles in the whole Constitution. So let's break down how Article 6 solved two massive, nation-threatening problems. Okay, first up, the young United States was facing a huge crisis of authority. The government they had under the Articles of Confederation, it was just weak, and the states were running wild. It was, to put it mildly, pure chaos. See, under that old system, the national government could go out and make treaties, but it had zero power to actually force the states to follow them. So you had states just ignoring federal laws, passing their own conflicting rules, and in doing so, they were putting the entire country's security and its reputation on the line. Let's get really specific here. This little bit of text is from the peace treaty that ended the Revolutionary War. The U.S. made a simple but crucial promise. British creditors could collect the debts that Americans owed them. This was absolutely essential for establishing peace and, looking credible on the world stage. So what happened? Well, several states basically turned around immediately and passed laws making it impossible for those debts to be collected. They just flat out violated the treaty. And this wasn't just some internal squabble. Great Britain used this broken promise as an excuse to keep its soldiers stationed in forts on American territory. A huge international crisis, all because of some defiant states. Okay, so the first idea to fix this problem was, let's call it the sledgehammer approach. James Madison and a few others proposed something called a congressional negative. It would have given the National Congress the power to just veto any state law it's in like. But yeah, this was seen as way too extreme, a massive overreach of federal power, and the idea was soundly rejected. So, with that veto idea totally dead in the water, the framers needed a new plan. And what they came up with was something far more elegant, something that would work from the inside out. And this is it. This is the solution. The Supremacy Clause. It's a simple idea, but it's totally revolutionary. It says that the Constitution and any federal laws and treaties made under it are the supreme law of the land. Period. End of story. This created a crystal clear legal pyramid, a pecking order. At the very top, you have the U.S. Constitution. Right below that, federal laws and treaties. And way down at the bottom, state laws. So if there's ever a conflict, federal law always wins. It's a simple and incredibly powerful hierarchy. And here's the really clever part. The Supremacy Clause didn't give Congress some big new power to veto things. No, instead, it gave a direct order to every single state judge in the country. It basically said, hey, your first loyalty is to the supreme law of the land. This turned every local courthouse into an outpost for enforcing federal law. That whole treaty problem? It was solved almost overnight, without a single federal agent having to get involved. Genius. All right, so that's problem number one solved. But Article V had another huge job to do. This one wasn't about money or treaties. This was about faith and your right to hold public office. Today, we pretty much take it for granted that someone's religion shouldn't disqualify them from public office. But back in the 1780s, that was a totally radical idea. The norm, both in Europe and right here in the American states, was to force officials to pass some kind of religious test. And we're not talking about some subtle, vague thing here. These tests were incredibly specific. In places like England, or even in states like North Carolina and Delaware, if you wanted to hold office, you had to belong to a specific state-approved version of Christianity. This was just how things were done. So what was the thinking behind this? Well, the justification, as the famous jurist William Blackstone put it, was all about security. These tests were seen as a necessary firewall to protect the state from the supposed dangers of nonconformists, which was basically anyone who wasn't part of the dominant faith, whether you were Catholic, Jewish, or even a member of a different Protestant sect. Okay, so you get it, right? This kind of religious discrimination was completely normal, totally accepted. And that's what makes what the framers did next in Article V so absolutely stunning. They decided to just break with centuries of tradition.
I mean, look at this. The contrast is just night and day. While all the states were busy barring people from office just because of their faith, the framers put a simple phrase into the Constitution for the new federal government: no religious test shall ever be required. This is the No Religious Test Clause. It is a clear, absolute, ironclad ban. It means that for any federal job, I don't care if it's a mail carrier or the President of the United States, the government cannot require you to belong to a certain church, or frankly, to even believe in God at all.
Now, you can bet this was controversial, but its defenders had some really powerful arguments. They argued it was essential for real religious liberty. It protected minority faiths from being persecuted by whatever the majority religion was. And they made a super practical point, too. A religious test isn't going to stop a dishonest person. They'll just lie to get the job. The only people it keeps out are honest people who happen to have different beliefs. Okay, so let's step back for a second and pull these two revolutionary ideas together. Let's see how the principles that were laid down in Article 6 continue to shape the country, even today. So what's the big takeaway here? It really boils down to two huge things. First, the Supremacy Clause created one unified legal system binding all the states together under federal law. And second, the No Religious Test Clause established a powerful foundation for religious freedom at the national level. And what's really fascinating is that this principle actually grew over time. You see, the clause originally only applied to the federal government, but its core idea didn't stay there. Much later, in 1961, the Supreme Court ruled in a case called Torcaso v. Watkins that states couldn't require religious tests either, finally extending that founding principle across the whole country. And this brings us to a final and pretty thorny question for our own time. We know the government can't make an official swear of a religious oath, but what does that clause really mean in practice today? Does its spirit suggest that a candidate's faith should be totally off-limits during, say, a confirmation hearing for a Supreme Court justice? Or is it just a ban on a formal, written test on paper? That's a debate that is very much alive today, and it just goes to show how relevant this short, powerful little article still is.